The water came at night. No thunder, no warning. Just a sound like the earth groaning. And then the sea swallowed everything. Homes, fields, entire coastlines. Gone before anyone could scream. That memory doesn't belong to one civilization. It belongs to dozens, separated by oceans, by millennia, by languages that share nothing in common. And yet, they all remember the same thing: a flood that ended the world. The obvious explanation is simple. People live near water. Water floods. Stories get told. Every culture has rain. Every culture has rivers. Of course, they'd invent flood stories, but that explanation misses something crucial. It doesn't account for the structure. Across more than 45 documented traditions, from ancient Sumer to the Ojibwe of North America, from the highlands of China to the rainforests of Mesoamerica, flood myths don't just share a theme. They share a plot. 4 beats, recurring with eerie precision. First, a warning. Divine, supernatural, unmistakable. Second, a catastrophic deluge that swallows everything. Third, a survivor who finds refuge, usually on a vessel. Fourth, humanity reborn from the wreckage. 92% of these legends include the warning. 87% describe a vessel. 75% depict repopulation. These aren't loose parallels. This is a narrative blueprint burned into the memory of our species. And the question that should keep you up at night is why? Why would cultures that never met, never traded, never shared a single word of language, independently construct the same 4-beat story? But to understand that, we need to go back to the end of the last ice age, when the planet itself was drowning. Between roughly 15,000 and 7,000 years ago, Earth shed its glaciers, slowly at first, then in terrifying bursts. Scientists call them meltwater pulses, sudden releases of stored ice that raise sea levels not gradually, not imperceptibly, but in catastrophic surges. Meltwater Pulse 1A, around 14,650 years ago, dumped enough water into the oceans to raise global sea levels by 16 meters in just 300 years. 16 meters. That's a 5-story building swallowed by the rising tide. But global averages hide the real horror. These surges didn't hit everywhere equally. In the Black Sea Basin, around 5,600 years before the Common Era, a freshwater pulse surged shorelines inward by roughly 9 meters in centuries. Marine sediment cores pinpoint the marker to within 50 years. The Persian Gulf's transgression advanced coastlines by 50 meters between 11,000 and 6,000 years ago. The Sunda Shelf, the vast landmass connecting Southeast Asia to Indonesia, sank beneath the waves at 15 millimeters per year for over 4,000 years. Entire homelands, entire worlds of human habitation, eaten alive by water that never receded. Now imagine you're standing on one of those coastlines. The sea that your grandparents knew as a distant shimmer is now lapping at your door. Your children's children won't have a home here. The land your ancestors walked is becoming ocean floor. You don't have writing. You don't have maps. You have one tool to preserve what happened: your voice. Here's where skeptics push back, and fairly. They argue that oral traditions are fragile, that stories degrade within a few generations, twisted by retelling until nothing original survives. It's a reasonable assumption. Written history bias trains us to distrust spoken memory. But the data tells a different story. Experiments simulating oral transmission across 50 generations, roughly 1,250 years, found that peripheral details decay at about 2% per generation. Names change, locations shift, minor characters vanish, but the core plot, the central beats of the narrative, those retained roughly 80% fidelity after 50 transmissions. The warning survived. The flood survived. The vessel survived. The rebirth survived. Think of it like this. Oral tradition is a telephone game, yes, but one where the message isn't a random sentence. It's a survival warning, and humans are wired to remember warnings. The gray details, who said what, which mountain, which river, those drift away like smoke. But the glowing core, the thing that matters, the water is coming, build something, save who you can, that travels intact through 1,000 years of whispered retellings. Aboriginal Australian flood legends offer perhaps the most staggering proof. Linguistic phylogenetic analysis dates some of these stories to approximately 7,000 years before the Common Era. 9,000 years of unbroken oral transmission. 9,000 years, and the core beats still match the geological record of post-glacial sea level rise along the Australian coast. But persistence alone doesn't explain the global pattern. If these stories survived through oral memory, did they also travel? Did traders and migrants carry flood tales from one civilization to another, seeding the same narrative across continents? The answer is both yes and no, and the distinction matters enormously. By 5,500 years before the Common Era, the city of Ur was importing 15% of its shells from the Makran coast, evidence of maritime trade routes spanning the Persian Gulf to the Indus Valley. Neolithic exchange networks crisscrossed Iran, linking Mesopotamia to South Asia through overland corridors. Along these routes traveled obsidian, shells, pottery, and inevitably, stories. When archaeologists unearthed 40 pieces of Cappadocian obsidian at Tel Brak, dating to 6,500 years before the Common Era, they weren't just finding rocks, they were finding proof that ideas, beliefs, and narratives had highways to travel. So yes, some flood myths spread through diffusion. The Sumerian account of Ziusudra, the Akkadian tale of Atrahasis, the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, these are clearly related, evolving along the same cultural corridor. The obvious conclusion would be that all flood myths trace back to a single Mesopotamian source, rippling outward like waves from a single stone. But that conclusion crashes against a wall 12,000 kilometers wide, an ocean, because across the Pacific, in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, flood stories existed with no evidence, none, of contact with the Old World before 1492. No Chinese artifacts in the Americas, no Mesopotamian pottery, no genetic evidence of trans-Pacific migration. The same is true of Bronze Age China's flood narratives, which developed independently along the Yellow River, separated from the Near East by vast deserts and mountain ranges. These stories didn't travel, they were born separately in different soils, from different waters, which means the floods themselves, real, local, geological events, were the common ancestor, not a single myth. This is the crucial reframe. Flood myths aren't copies of one original. They're parallel responses to parallel catastrophes, independent light bulbs switching on across the globe, wherever the water rose fast enough to scar human memory. And the scars go deeper than narrative structure. Beyond the four-beat plot, specific symbols recur with statistical regularity that defies coincidence. The ark or vessel appears in 89% of flood myths. Animal pairs, creatures saved 2 by 2, show up in 73%. Rainbow covenants, promises that the destruction won't come again, appear in 49%. Bird releases, a dove, a raven, some winged messenger sent to find dry land, in 33%. These aren't borrowed motifs. They're convergent solutions to the same problem. How do you encode survival instructions in a story? You build a vessel, you preserve biodiversity, you mark the end of danger. You send scouts. The symbols aren't religious decoration. They're practical memory devices refined by thousands of years of retelling. But still, the skeptic has one more card to play. Carl Jung argued that universal archetypes, water as purification, death and rebirth, the hero's journey, emerge from shared human psychology, not shared history. Maybe flood stories are simply what human brains produce when processing existential fear. Maybe they reveal nothing about real events and everything about the architecture of human imagination. It's a compelling argument, and it's not entirely wrong. Archetypes do shape narrative form, but archetypes can't explain timing. They can't explain why the geological record and the mythological record sync within centuries at specific locations. A tsunami deposit in the eastern Mediterranean, dated to 6,200 years before the Common Era, broken pottery embedded in marine silt, aligns with flood legends from that exact region and era. A 7,200-year-old boulder deposit in the Indian Ocean matches narratives from coastal South Asian communities. An Atlantic mega-surge marker at 8,100 years before the Common Era lines up with stories preserved along European and North African coastlines. Around 8,200 years before the Common Era, the catastrophic outburst of glacial Lake Agassiz released 9,000 cubic kilometers of meltwater into the North Atlantic. 9,000 cubic kilometers. That's enough to fill every lake in Europe twice over. The resulting climate disruption, the so-called 8.2-kilo-year event, sent temperatures plummeting and coastlines surging across the northern hemisphere. Communities that had settled along newly exposed continental shelves were obliterated, and the survivors told stories. Archetypes gave those stories their shape, yes, the hero, the warning, the covenant. But geology gave them their substance, the dates, the locations, the specific patterns of destruction. The myth is the fossil imprint, not of an animal, but of an experience. Peel back the narrative sediment, and you find the event beneath, preserved in story the way a fern is preserved in stone. This is where we still have open questions. Was the Black Sea's 5,600-year-old freshwater influx a sudden catastrophic breach, a wall of water pouring through the Bosphorus, or a more gradual transgression over centuries? Recent research suggests it may have occurred in two distinct phases, which would explain why some Black Sea flood legends describe instant apocalypse, while others describe a slow, inexorable drowning. Can we reliably assign calendar dates to oral legends? Bayesian linguistic methods are pushing the boundaries, but uncertainties remain wide. How far did Neolithic trade networks actually extend? Genomic studies reveal intermittent connectivity between populations we once assumed were isolated, complicating neat diffusion versus invention models. And there's one more mystery that rarely gets discussed. The Rainbow Covenant, that recurring promise of safety after catastrophe, appears in nearly half of all flood myths. But when did this symbol emerge? Egyptian boglyphs date to 3,200 years before the Common Era. Mesopotamian cylinder seals depict rainbow-like arcs as early as 4,500 years before the Common Era. Did the rainbow as a post-flood symbol predate writing entirely, surviving only in oral tradition until someone carved it into clay? Or was it a later theological addition, layered onto older, rawer stories of pure survival? We don't know yet, but the fact that we can even ask the question, that we can use geology, linguistics, genetics, and archaeology to interrogate stories our ancestors whispered around fires 10,000 years ago, that itself is remarkable. These aren't just myths. They're the oldest warning system humanity ever built. Before written language, before seismographs, before satellite imagery, our species encoded catastrophic climate data into 4-beat stories and passed them from mouth to ear for millennia. The warning survived. The vessel survived. The rebirth survived. The question is whether we're still listening. If this story pulled you in, there's a deeper current running through this channel. Stories where myth and evidence collide, where legends crack open to reveal something real beneath. Subscribe, because the next one goes even further back. The water came at night, and we remember. Not because someone wrote it down, because someone refused to let their children forget.